Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well. On this fabulous Tuesday, can I just say, you guys are looking fantastic. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get straight into the meat and potatoes, as today we're just looking at some of the mistakes as we ask ourselves, could Bryan Kohberger walk? Now look, what I'd mean by this is, could he be guilty of this crime and walk because of mistakes that were made? And the more we look into things and see what's happening in the background, the more you have to consider that a possibility. Now, as you know, I'm an advocate for innocent until proven guilty. But at the end of the day, this crime was done by someone. And I think that even the people who believe that Bryan Kohberger didn't do this crime alone, they are still of a mindset that he was simply part of a bigger machine. Perhaps he was a driver. Perhaps he had managed to manipulate someone to do the crime for him. Remember, Bryan loves to believe, as far as we've been told, loves to believe he's the smartest guy in the room. And we have mixed emotions when we see him in the courtroom. Some of us will say that he's got a Ted Bundy look about him. Some of us think that he just looks like a little bit of a geek who maybe have gotten into something that he shouldn't have, and now he's got to fight his way out. But ultimately, there's a question of, if you didn't do it, would you not be screaming from the rooftops? I suppose the answer to that question could be, would you scream from the rooftops if you thought it wasn't going to do you any good? But instead, you did have a specific skill set that could potentially assist you in this situation. And when paired with a lethal legal team, would you be able to potentially exploit mistakes that have been made? At the end of the day, Bryan Kohberger didn't say not guilty. Now, there is an argument, and a lot of legal professionals would turn around and say, look, if he genuinely hadn't done it, if he had nothing to do with this crime whatsoever, then any sane person would have perhaps said, I am not guilty. But on the grander scheme of things, would it have made any difference? And at the end of the day, he has a right to remain silent. Many people have turned around and said, look, this is pretty much standard procedure. Many people will choose to do the same, and they will simply speak through their attorney. So pretty much normality, some people are saying. But what mistakes could be exploited? What have we seen throughout this case that could be considered an exploitable mistake? Now, I'm guessing that we haven't seen all of these, but we could also say that there's potentially a lot more evidence in the background that none of us have been privy to, because we are not, we don't have to see that. It's not for us to see. At the end of the day, law enforcement has a job to do, and many elements of that will need to be protected in order to maintain a process that is bulletproof, should we say. It could be argued that that's gone out the window when you look at some of the things that we've seen in the background, such as the News Nation leaks and the Dateline documentary that's throwing Kohberger under the bus left, right and centre. But look, what did we see right from the beginning? We saw this crime committed. We then heard law enforcement come out and stumble and mess about regarding whether this was targeted, whether it was not targeted, whether people were safe, whether they weren't safe. Yes, you're safe, but be vigilant. We believe it's targeted, but just keep an eye out just in case we got it wrong. So pretty much out of the gates, law enforcement didn't really have a handle on this situation. We then saw a situation where they were looking at looking for a Hyundai Elantra. They were asking the public for assistance, and it would seem that they were looking for a Hyundai Elantra that at that point in time did not match Bryan Kohberger's. You would think in the event of looking for a specific car, in this specific type of crime, they would have experts that would be able to ascertain the make and model of a car, especially when this is a car that is prevalent through many US states, one of the most popular cars, and you'd be able to tell what year it was, you'd think. But at the end of the day, they seem to struggle with that fact. We then have a situation where we have documentation that would not mention the knife sheath that would become the focal point of this case very early on. That was kind of introduced after the initial paperwork had gone out, but look, that might just be something that we didn't see. It might have been right at the early days and it was in there, we just didn't see that version of everything, and look, it was found. But ultimately, this one element of the case became the catalyst for looking at Bryan Kohberger himself. But then there was still stumbling around that with regards to how they would get the DNA. It just seemed to be a little bit of a convoluted process. And I can't understand that if they knew the guy that they were looking for was Bryan Kohberger himself, why they couldn't have just gone for his DNA. Why couldn't they have approached him and requested DNA from him, in, you know, bearing in mind that he'd approached them for help and they would have known all this, and, you know, he may not have been too apprehensive about giving his DNA. We also hear that he himself had given his DNA onto databases, looking at his own genealogy. Now, is that true? We're not 100% sure, but if we knew that, why didn't law enforcement look at some of these sites to see whether they could actually pinpoint his DNA? It just, like I say, it just seems to be a little bit of a convoluted way of doing it. We also have a situation where we have an eyewitness. Do we have an eyewitness, though? And this seems to be an issue, a sticking point, because it would appear that the prosecution are pushing for finding out exactly who said what. That seems to be what they're really focusing their attention on, the details. Who said what was the chain of command, what have you got actually on record being said, what have you got on record being done. And this concerns me. It concerns me because I feel that they are looking for a technical get out. Either that or Bryan Kohberger is trying to see who has said something that he knows is wrong, and he can fight that specific point. If he can find out that this eyewitness, if you like, specifically said a certain thing about seeing him in a certain time, or seeing him wearing a certain thing, or seeing something, just imagine this, right? Just imagine Bryan Kohberger was indeed in that area that night, but he wasn't where the cameras said he was, or where the eyewitness said he was, and he can prove that he wasn't specifically in that place, and then everything starts to fall apart like a house of cards. They're very, very attacking the small, intricate details. And we also hear over on Jaws of All Trades that there is the families in the background who are seemingly reserving their right to sue Moscow PD. Perhaps they should look to sue the college as well. But anyway, that's by and by. But it would appear that there's a lot of people around this case who are on tenterhooks. We know that the search itself seemed to not be being done in the manner with which it should, in order to remain and sustain the integrity of that crime scene. It was open to the public. The cars, public had access to them. They were carrying stuff out. They were not wearing appropriate clothing at all times. We know that people were in and out of there during the period of when the 911 call was being called. We also haven't heard the 911 call from a public records perspective, so they seem to be keeping even the 911 call under wraps. And there's just a lot of things that they seem to be, there's a potential for them to be exploited. Now, I don't want to keep going over the Brady Giglio stuff. I know it's we feel that it's nothing to do with this case. It is the Stickergate situation, but ultimately it is a bit of a sticky wicket because it proves that the integrity of officers can be challenged. But ultimately, can Bryan Kohberger walk? Could he have done it, and could he have walked? There's a possibility that he did it and he could walk. There's a possibility that he's part of a big machine and they all walk. But it is going to come down to whether every single I was dotted and T was crossed. And I want you to let me know down below, with what you know, even if you're a yes, Kohberger did it, or no, he didn't do it, or I feel any camp that you're in, do you feel that in this case you could truly say that every I has been dotted and every T has been crossed, and there is no chance that he's going to walk? Are you absolutely confident that Bryan Kohberger is not going to walk away from this, regardless of whether he did it or not? Let me know down below. I'll catch you all in the next one.